For decades, mac and cheese had been a cultural icon in America. Families grew up with it through the Great Depression, through the World War II, through a generation of busy households. It was cheap, it was fast, it was everywhere. For years, it dominated grocery shelves. But suddenly, it was fallen. The big question is this: what could something that worked for 70 years start collapsing almost overnight? Was it a bad management? Was it a changing consumer taste? Was it a corporate greed? Well, the real answer is more complicated and honestly, a lot more interesting. This is the story of the rise and fall of a Kraft mac and cheese. Let us go back 1937. That's where the entire story really begins. The traveling salesman named Grand Leslie had a simple idea. What if you could put pasta and cheese into one small box and create a dinner that anyone could make it in a minute? Simple, cheap, convenient. Kraft noticed the idea, and like many big companies do, they moved fast. They created their own version, Kraft macaroni cheese. The promise was powerful. Feed a family for 4 in just 9 minutes. Price just 19 cents. It was an instant hit. In the first year alone, they sold 8 million boxes. Then came World War II, and the demand exploded. Women were entering the workforce, families had less time to cook, meat was rationed for the war effort, and suddenly, Kraft became the perfect solution. In fact, during the war, you could buy a 2-box with just one ration stamp. In 1943 alone, Kraft sold 18 million boxes, an unbelievable number for that time. And from that moment on, the blue box became the household staple. For the next 70 years, Kraft mac and cheese ruled the grocery aisle. They kept expanding the brand, the new shapes, new flavors, even their own mascot. Every kid grew up eating it. By 2010, the Kraft was selling 350 million boxes every year. They controlled 46% of the entire mac and cheese market. No competitor even came close. They were sitting comfortably at the top, but that's usually the moment when things began to change. Because in 2013, a new group of powerful investors entered the picture. The Brazilian private equity firm called 3G Capital. They teamed up with Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway to buy a Kraft and Heinz in price tag $23 billion. Their goal was simple: create a giant in the global food industry. 3G had a reputation for a very special strategy. They had used it before with companies like Burger King. The strategy was brutally simple: cut costs, profits go up, stock price go up, investors celebrate. And at first, it worked perfectly. In 2015, Kraft and Heinz officially merged as $46 billion deal. Suddenly, the third largest food company in North America was born. But what happened next would slowly begin to hollow out the company from the inside. 3G's system was based on something called a zero-based budgeting. Instead of starting each year with a previous budget, you start from zero. Every expense must be justified again. Sounds efficient, and in many cases it is. But in practice, it often means one thing: massive cost cutting. Within 7 months of taking control, the company laid off 5,000 employees, more than 10% of the workforce. Factories were closed, departments were eliminated, and at first, profit exploded, margin jumped to 30%. For comparison, food giants like Nestle runs closer to 20%. Wall Street loved it, and stocks soared. By 2017, it peaked, $96 per share. Everything looked brilliant. But there is a problem with aggressive cost cutting. At first you remove fat, then eventually you start cutting muscles, and finally you start cutting bones. That's exactly what happened to Kraft Heinz. For example, the company had historically spent $1 billion a year on advertising, reminding customers why they loved the brand. 3G cut 400 million from that budget, and short term, great for a profit, long term, disastrous for the brand. Because if you stop reminding people why your product matters, eventually they forget. At the same time, the company barely invested in research and development, just 0.36% of revenue. Other food companies were spending 3 to 4 times more. Less innovation, less improvement, less adoption to the changing taste, and the world was changing fast. In 2016, Kraft Heinz organic growth had turned negative. Revenue was shrinking. Meanwhile, customers' habits were shifting. People were starting to read ingredient labels. Families wanted a food that felt healthier and more natural. And suddenly, that iconic bulldog started looking a little outdated. Ingredients people could not pronounce. As the consumer noticed, competitor noticed too. Other brands started gaining traction. They looked healthier, more wholesome, and they marketed that message aggressively. With Kraft was cutting marketing budget, competitors were spending more. New brands entered the market, products with simpler ingredients, cleaner labels, modern packaging. Some even targeted adults instead of children, and that strategy worked brilliantly. Because when adults choose the food in the house, kids usually eat what adults buy. Slowly, the market shifted. Private labels grew, health-focused brands expanded, and Kraft mac cheese, once the undisputed king, started losing ground. Market share slipped from 45% into 30%. Meanwhile, the new competitor rose rapidly. In the 2019, the moment of truth arrived. Kraft announced $15.4 billion write-down. Investors panicked. The stock collapsed. Regulator began investigating accounting practices. CEO was pushed out. 3G Capital eventually exited the company, and Warner Buffett personally lost around $3 billion on the deal. Which brings us back to the original question. What exactly killed the blue box empire? Was it too much cost-cutting? Was it changing customer taste? Or was it simply a company that stopped adapting? While the world kept moving forward, because in business, staying successful isn't about protecting the old recipe, it's about recognizing when the recipe itself needs to change.